Good afternoon, Woodville Post 16. I have been thinking about how I might just kind of engage with you guys a bit because I'm missing you all, and I would just like to let you know that I'm here, but I don't want to chat at an empty camera or with no audience. So I thought I would do a recording of a book. My children have their teachers leaving them videos online, stories. Um, I've been following some people who talk to the camera, comedians, musicians, and storytellers. And it makes you feel a little like you're being spoken to by somebody outside your house, which doesn't happen an awful lot at the moment. So I thought I would pick up this book. It's Roald Dahl, My Year. You will know Roald Dahl from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, Matilda. He also wrote some adult mystery stories, and he wrote his memoirs, his autobiographies called Boy and Going Solo. He's a lovely writer, and this I thought would be quite nice because some of you have told me about what you've seen outside your windows, outside your houses. And this is what Roald Dahl is doing in the book. He's telling you a bit about his life, but he's also telling you what he can see when he goes through his daily walks here in the countryside in Oxfordshire. And because he's a lovely writer, his stories are lovely. So I'm going to start at January, which I've already tried once today and it went terribly wrong. It has pictures by Quentin Blake, which you will recognise from his other storybooks, but this isn't a child's story, so please don't make that mistake and be put off. Okay, there's a picture to get you started. When I was a little boy, I had a tiny boat made of tin. There was no plastic in those days, which had a very small clockwork motor inside, and I used to play with it while I was having my bath. One day the tiny boat developed a leak in its hull, and it filled with water and sank. For many weeks after that, I would lie in my bath, worrying about whether my own skin would develop a leak in it, just as the little boat's hull had done, and I felt certain my body would fill with water and I would sink or die. But it never happened, and I marvelled at the watertightness of the skin that covered my body. Whether you are playing with a little boat or not, a hot bath is the best place for all of us in the miserable month of January. The excitement of Christmas is long past, and school is soon beginning again, and there is really nothing to look forward to except the cold weeks ahead. If I had my way, I would remove January from the calendar altogether and have an extra July instead. For the last 12 months, we have all been living in 1 year, and now all of a sudden it is another. It is extraordinary how tremendous this change takes place in the space of a fraction of a second. As the clock approaches midnight on the 31st of December, you are still in the old year, but then all at once, 1/1,000,000th of a second after midnight, you're in the new. I've always found this sudden change from 1 year to another awfully hard to get used to, and all through the new January that follows, I keep writing down the old year instead of the new one on letters and cheques and other bits of paper. The same sort of thing happens on your birthday when you are 9 years old one day and 10 years old the next. It is lovely to be a year older, but it is the suddenness of all that is so amazing. January, I now remember, was a month I had my first office job in London at the age of 18. The pay was £5 a week, and I used to travel up by train from where I lived in Kent to a station in the city of London called Cannon Street. As soon as I jumped off the train, there was a mad gallop through the crowded streets in the slushy snow to reach the great hall of the Shell Company's building in order to clock in by 9 o'clock. I was one of a small group of Eastern Staff trainees, and absolute punctuality was demanded of us. If we were late, we were reported to the directors. At lunchtime, I used to go to a pub for a pork pie and a beer, and on my way back to the office, I always, absolutely always, treated myself to a twopenny bar of Cadbury's chocolate dairy milk. By the time I got back to the office, I had eaten all the chocolate, but I never threw away the silver paper. On the very first day, I rolled it into a tiny ball and left it on my desk. On the second day, I rolled the second bit of silver paper around the first bit. And every day from then on, I added another bit of silver paper to that little ball. The ball began to grow. In 1 year, it had become very neatly as big as a tennis ball and just as round. It was extraordinarily heavy. When I picked it up, it felt like a lump of lead, and I think this was because in those days, some 50 years ago, the silver paper they used to wrap chocolate in was much thicker than it is today, and very much superior all around. I never lost my chocolate silver paper ball, and today it sits, as it has done ever since I started to write, on the old pine table beside my writing chair. That table is now cluttered with many curious objects that have found their way onto it over the years. As I sit here in my comfortable chair with my writing board across my lap, I can see scattered over the tabletop the following things: a baby seal carved out of whalebone, given to me by some Eskimos in Canada; a meteorite the size of a golf ball; a painted fragment of a small ancient vase picked up in a ploughed field in Greece; a strangely shaped stone found in a riverbed in Texas, made by Red Indians many years ago; one of my own hip bones, the head of the femur, which the surgeon gave me after he had sawed it off and stuck a steel one inside me instead. He said it was worth keeping because it was the biggest hip bone he had ever seen. A steel hip, called a prosthesis, is on my table too. This one had once been embedded in my body, but it went wrong and had to be replaced. It is a rather beautiful object made of shining steel that looks like a Turkish dagger, and it has a small ball at one end. A glass bottle full of mauve-coloured bits of gristle immersed in preserving fluid, which another surgeon gave me after he chopped them out of my spine. A cone from a cedar tree. I love cedar cones. A rough stone ball as big as a melon, which had been cut in half to reveal very beautiful blue veined agate inside. Another glass bottle in which lies the tiny mechanism or valve which I helped to invent for draining off excess fluid from the ventricles of the brains of children who suffer from a type of brain injury known as hydrocephalus. A star of the desert, which is a large and marvellously shaped piece of stone, crystalline and reddish brown and crinkly all over. I picked that one up in the Libyan desert during the war. A large piece of ambergris preserved in a bottle. Look it up in the dictionary, and you will see that it is the intestinal secretion of the sperm whale, and is much prized by makers of expensive perfumes. It is found by beachcombers, who often spend years combing the silver beaches in far-off Pacific islands for this valuable and peculiar substance. My father's silver and tortoiseshell paper knife. A marvellous carving of a green grasshopper sent to me by someone who had read James and the Giant Peach. A transparent plastic box with a miniature musical box inside it, which starts to play Edelweiss as soon as you put it into the sunlight. This is just the sort of toy that fascinates me. No clockwork, no batteries, just let the sun shine on it and it plays you a tune. A small model of a Hurricane fighter plane made for me by a boy who had read Going Solo. A wonderful piece of rock veined with opal that glistens and glows in red and green and blue. It was sent to me by a young lad who lives in a place called Mintabai in the remote outback of Australia. Mintabai only exists because of the opals they find there. And when I was in Australia in 1989, I spoke by radio telephone to the children of the tiny Mintabai school. To this particular boy, I said, "Do you ever find opals?" "We all find them," he answered, and apparently, as soon as he got the chance, he rushed down to the creek and hunted until he found this splendid specimen, which he mailed to Puffin Books in Melbourne with a request that they forwarded it to me. Of course, I wrote to thank him. A piece of stone with ancient cuneiform writing on it, which I picked up in Babylon, of all places, during the war in 1940. 3 other pilots and I hired an old car and drove miles across the Iraqi desert to visit this famous city. It was amazing and totally deserted. The streets and houses were all about 50 feet below ground level, and the walls were covered in carvings of lions and mythical beasts. We wandered through the silent streets and among the ruins, and I shall never forget the air of mystery and wonder that surrounded us everywhere. Lastly, on my old table, there is a photograph of my lovely wife, Lissy, and another of my first granddaughter, Sophie. There is just one small bright spark shining through the gloom in my January garden. The first snowdrops are in flower. And it's just finished here with a picture of the snowdrops. And so that's January. Let me know what you think. And if there's a story you prefer me to read, I'm quite happy to, but I don't want to pick a big, serious, long book, because hopefully it won't be that long. And I do have 2 children here to read to every night. And you can see here's their home learning plans, can you see? Things they have to do. So we are keeping quite busy. I'm trying to set work for you. I'm trying to keep my kids busy, and we are doing lots and lots and lots of Lego things. Take care, all of you. Keep in touch. Bye.